I'm Shabnam Mustafa, and Mubaraka Amini tonight will be your MCs. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on where we have gathered here tonight, the Wandering Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations, and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And whilst we're acknowledging, I also want to acknowledge the deep history and connection of First Nations people to this land, and pay our respects also to their culture and care for the land and its waters for over 60,000 years before any of us found our way here. As members of the Hazara community, we're very, very familiar with the pain of dispossession, with the pain of discrimination and injustice. And we hold that is the history of Australia. We hold that, and that's what grounds us in our day-to-day advocacy, because there's no justice for anybody until there is justice for the First Nations people. Welcome you all here tonight. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you to the community members. Thank you to our partners and allies and everyone else who has made time to come here tonight and commemorate and remember and honour the lives lost to pointless acts of violence and lives that keep being lost to violence here tonight. No doubt you've all heard what has happened on Tuesday the 19th of April. Once again, two educational centres, Abdul Rahim Shaheed High School and Mumtaz Educational Centre in Kabul, Afghanistan, came under coordinated and systematic attacks. Both the centres in Dasht-e-Barchi, the Hazara ethnic neighbourhood in West Kabul. Both coordinated attacks have taken more than 100 lives, but also more than 100 young lives, more than 100 futures lost, and potential for bringing peace and prosperity to a nation that has been bleeding for over 40 years, a nation that has been in conflict for over 14 years. We don't actually know the number of people whose lives have been lost because media is heavily suppressed in the country. The new regime in the country that has come on bans any sort of reporting. We know anecdotally because most of us here tonight have family, most of us here tonight have relatives, and we know what they go through on the ground there, and we take that trauma, we take that grief, and we take that pain with us, and we live with that here. This atrocity and the atrocities that continue to happen, specifically on the Hazara community in Afghanistan, they have an immense impact on the Hazara community here. Each one of us have been deeply and personally impacted by the ongoing persecution of our people, not just since the fall of Kabul in August last year, but for many, many decades and over a century. But this incident of the last week has had significant and severe impacts on the Hazara community in Australia, but particularly the Hazara community that makes such a prominent community in Melbourne's southeast, in the city of Greater Dandenong, in the cities of Casey and Cardinia Shire Local Council, but also across Victoria in the north and west as well. Victorian Hazaras are deeply impacted by these attacks, who have had families and close relatives who were either in the area or whose lives have been lost, and they keep getting targeted over and over again. We cannot deny that it makes actions that constitute as genocide. We've also witnessed further attacks since the two attacks on the educational centres. On Thursday, the 21st of April, targeting a Shia mosque in the city of Mazar-e-Sharif and another in Kunduz, killing and injuring dozens more. Through this vigil tonight, through us coming together here tonight, we're really hoping to raise awareness about the injustices and severity of the injustices that the Hazara people continue to experience in Afghanistan. Demand that the Australian government and the international community recognise this as injustice and take accountability for the actions that we have had and what role we have played in the last 20 years as a nation in what's going on in Afghanistan right now, and do more to take meaningful action for Afghanistan and its people, whether that's in Afghanistan or here, on those of us who are in Australia.
گیرم که در باورتون به خاک نشسته اید و ساقه های جوانمان از ضربه های تبرهاتان زخم دار است، با ریشه چه می کنید؟ گیرم که بر سر این باغ بنشسته در کمین پرنده‌ای، پرواز را علامت ممنوع می زنید، با جوجه های نشسته در آشیانه چه می کنید؟ گیرم که می کشید، گیرم که می برید، گیرم که می زنید، با رویش ناگزیر جوانه چه می کنید؟ سلام و خسته نباشید عرض می‌کنم خدمت همه شما دوستان که در این ماه پربرکت رمضان از راه‌های دور و نزدیک تشریف آوردیم تا در کنار هم امشب و یاد نوجوانان و شهیدان وطنمان شمع روشن کنیم. واقعاً که حادثه تکان دهنده و تلخی بود که همه ما از راه دور شاهد بودیم و تلختر از این حادثه این که این اولین بار نبود که ما شاهد قتل و انفجار و قتل عام مردم بیگناه و طفل‌های هزاره در افغانستان بودیم و متاسفانه این که آخرین بار هم نخواهد بود. خیلی از ما خانواده‌هایمان در کابل هستند و دلنگرانی و دلواپسی‌های زیادی را در این ماه تحمل می‌کنیم. امشب از طریق این شب زنده‌داری امیدواریم که آگاهی را در مورد بی‌عدالتی و شدت نسل‌کشی هزارها در افغانستان افزایش دهیم. از جامعه استرالیا و جامعه بین‌المللی بخواهیم که در قبال این نقض ظالمانه حقوق بشر پاسخگو باشد و اقدامات بیشتری را برای مردم افغانستان انجام دهند. و تنها کاری که میتونیم برای مردم افغانستان امشب انجام بدهیم اینه که برای خانواده‌های شهدا بگوییم که ما در کنارتان هستیم، درد شما درد ماست و این درد بسیار عظیم و فراموش نشدنی خواهد بود. نام من مبارکه امینی است و امشب در کنار خانم شبنم صفا هستیم که در بخش پیشبرد فارسی برنامه در کنارتان باشه. I also wanted to use this opportunity to say hi to all our non-Afghan friends and member of parliament that they are here tonight. We really appreciate your sympathy and time to be with us in this difficult time. It truly means a lot to us. Thank you. و در این بخش برنامه از آقای باقر علیراد دعوت میکنیم که برای توضیح دادن برنامه و خیر مقدم‌گویی شما مهمانان تشریف بیارن و چند کلمه ای را عرض کنید. تشکر.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you to each and every one of you for being here and standing in solidarity, shoulder to shoulder, with my community. We were very pleased to have honorable guests, politicians, and community leaders in this tragic time with us. This evening, we are speaking out against the continuous genocide of my people, the Shia Hazara ethnic group. This week, once again, there have been a few intentional killing of my people, killing of defenseless people at mosque and school. This is a day to remember, a day to brave mothers, fathers who have been fighting to protect their children against massacres by the Taliban. But their lives were taken by the evil Taliban and their allies, the young, innocent, defenseless Hazara students who attended a local school and murdered by the evil Taliban. Again, thank you for being here today with us, and I would like to ask everyone to remember every single life that has been taken by this evil Taliban and their allies. I would like to say a few words in our Hazara language. عرض سلام و درود خدمت قوما و هموطنان عزیز. طاعات و عبادات همه‌تان قبول درگاه حق. امسال چندمین سالی هست که ما شاهد جاری شدن جویبار خون برادران و خواهرانمان در مکاتب، مساجد و شفاخانه‌ها و در این ماه مبارک رمضان هستیم. خونی که از طفل تازه به دنیا گرفته آمده تا مرد و زن کهنسال ماست. هدف ما از برپایی این برنامه ابراز غمشریکی با خانواده‌های شهدا، اتحاد قوم و بلند کردن هزاران صدای خفته و صدای گرفته شده ما در افغانستان است. با این تجمع می‌خواهیم بلندتر و متحدتر از هر زمان دیگری صدایمان را به گوش جامعه جهانی، دولت مردان استرالیا و سازمان‌های حقوق بشر برسانیم که نسل کشی هزارها را به رسمیت بشناسند و اقدام‌های جدی برای نجات این مردم از زیر چتر گروه‌های تروریستی انجام دهند. قدم شما خوبان را در این جمع خوش آمدید میگویم و برنامه‌ای که متعلق به خود شماست و انشالله همیشه با این اتحاد و همکاری و به دور از منافع شخصی برای منافع جمعی کارهای خوبی بتوانیم انجام دهیم. تشکر. انشالله برنامه خوبی داشته باشید.
At this point in time, I would like to introduce Ms. Shamsia Hussainpour to come up to the stage.
Good evening, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we stand, work, and live, the Wurundjeri people, and I pay my respect to both their elders, past and present. I would also like to preface the following with a trigger warning for those of you surviving the complexities of PTSD associated with survival. In our case, the survival of war, relocation, and everything that goes hand in hand with that. I will be making a mention of recent acts of terrorism and reference to the lives lost. While this fact needs to be presented in the context of this evening, I acknowledge they can serve as triggers in certain instances. Standing before you, I may look reasonably well put together. In respect of and with acknowledgement for the victims of another 4 terrorist attacks inflicted on the people of our people in Afghanistan, I can assure you it's quite the opposite. Like many of you, the ache in my heart grows stronger with news like this from Afghanistan. The presentation I make externally is by no means a reflection of my inner turmoil, but out of consideration of the privilege I have to use my voice on behalf of those who don't have the opportunity or are no longer able to do so. As always, news of atrocities directly impacts the communities that have been directly targeted in Afghanistan, such as the Hazaras. But more broadly, it affects all of us around the world and those of us who have been displaced from our country and now face alive with all the purported safety and security of the first world, while it's hankering for the familiarity and the familiar ties of a home we feel so helpless in defending. The majority of the victims in the most recent attacks were Hazaras, Shias, and innocent children. For a great deal of us here this evening, the majority of our families remain in Dashti Barchi, an area of Western Kabul already embedded in disadvantage and all the hardship of existing day to day within that. And even as our people attempt to rise above adversity and go peacefully about the business of their daily existence, they are still targeted, attending schools, mosques, hospitals, and even while trying to enjoy the joys to be found in celebrations like weddings. Such attacks against Hazaras in Afghanistan are not new. As recent as 8th of May 2021, explosions outside a school in Kabul killed at least 85 people and wounded over 240 people. In that attack, most victims were girls attending the Sayyid al-Shuhada school in the same area as these events took place. On 12th of May 2020, 3 gunmen targeted a maternity clinic in a Hazara Shia neighborhood in Kabul. They killed 24 mothers, newborns, and a medical professional. On 6th of March 2020, 32 members of the community were killed at a ceremony. On 24th of October 2020, a bomber killed 20 people at an educational center in a Hazara neighborhood. Over 70 were injured. The list goes on, as does the campaign of terror behind it. These are not random attacks. They are premeditated, orchestrated, and targeted attacks on Hazaras and Shias in Afghanistan. Where can Hazara people go when seeking the basic and fundamental right of safety other than a burial ground? What does it take for a Hazara mother to be afforded with the basic human right of expecting her child's safety of coming home after school? Reports are emerging from incredible sources informing us that the bodies of the victims were discarded in a large container behind Muhammad Ali Jinnah's hospital in Kabul. This meant that families of the victims have been denied the rights to identify their loved ones and pay their final respects. We're all aware of how the process of grief becomes complicated and the long-lasting effects of trauma are exaggerated when you are denied the basic right to bury a loved one and treat them with dignity they deserve. In the situation of Afghanistan, it is also an opportunity to provide the victims with the level of respect in death that they were robbed of life. Collectively, the world has failed our people. Leadership seems to be nothing more than a tokenistic label for the privileged and enabled, and peacemakers are only found to be proactive where it suits a predefined agenda for those in positions of leadership. And so here we are tonight again, united in grief by our country's latest losses. With heavy and aching hearts, we acknowledge the victims and commit to being the pillars of love and support within our communities to those that have been affected directly and left behind. But also out of respect for those of us who are the burden of the loss of life at the hands of terrorism and war in Afghanistan. Those of us who are triggered by these fresh tragedies yet carry on and make an effort in appearing to be reasonably well put together. My aim in standing before you this evening, united by our grief, collective in our anger, is to shed a light on the situation the Hazaras await to face day in and day out, and engage the international community to act with us in a unified approach. It is with this level of broader support our voices will be carried across the miles and remain audible so that our message will be heard. We have done as much as we can do with the tools we have at our disposal. Our prayers can only achieve so much, and we can no longer have faith in the miracles that could enact and deepen and lasting change for the optimum outcomes of Hazara living in Afghanistan. To the families and communities that have been affected to date, we grieve with you, we love you, we support you, and we are committed to the amplification of your voices on the wings of the freedoms afforded to us, in the hope that these atrocities may be brought to an end. Thank you so much.
On that note, I'd like to now ask Mr. Jim Menti, the Mayor for the City of Greater Dandenong, to come up and share a few words of solidarity with us here tonight.
Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land and pay my respects to their elders, both past, present and emerging. Tonight, we gather in Harmony Square, united in our search for peace. We are questioning why such horrific acts of terrorism and violence continue to occur. We have all been left wondering why innocent lives continue to be lost. And we pray for those who sustained injuries or whose lives have been forever affected by this tragedy. The city of Greater Dandenong is Australia's most multicultural municipality. It is among the most vibrant and culturally diverse cities in our country. As Mayor, I am deeply aware of the strength that people of different nations and cultural backgrounds draw from a shared purpose, from common values and from mutual respect. Tonight, we are united in condemning these senseless acts of violence and in sharing a hope for peace, tolerance and acceptance. Thank you for standing together as a community this evening in support of our Hazara brothers and sisters. Thank you.
I would love to ask the Labor member for Bruce, Mr. Julian Hill, a long-time friend of the Afghan community, also the candidate for Bruce now, to come up and share a few words of solidarity.
Assalamu alaikum, Ramadan Mubarak to everyone. Can I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I also see my very good friend Tien Q, Dr Tien Q MP, who's a Labor MP representing our area. Tien actually arrived himself on a boat as a refugee many years ago from Vietnam, and I know speaks so powerfully about the issues facing so many people here from the Hazara community. Councillor Jim Mamedi, the Mayor, councillors, also Matthew Kerwin, an old friend, the Greens candidate for Bruce at this election. I'm here to grieve with you, to stand in solidarity with you, to share your pain at these atrocities that yet again we're here to acknowledge that have been occurring in Afghanistan. But also, not just to bear silent witness, but to speak up. These are blatant attacks on Hazaras and Shia Muslims in Afghanistan by extreme radical elements. They have not been stopped, they have not been condemned by the Taliban, the purported government of the country. And I acknowledge your words and call Shabnam to not recognise the Taliban as the government of Afghanistan. They're disgusting and inhuman acts, and we've already heard so powerfully. These are not political statements, these are targeted and systemic acts of murder. Targeted for mass outrage of the most vulnerable citizens, school children. School children in a school, one of the best schools in Afghanistan that teaches 30,000 students. Attacks on people simply worshipping their God in the way that they choose at the mosque. Or indeed, it's 2 years now since the atrocity of murdering pregnant mothers and mothers who've just given birth to their own children. It's even more appalling that this is being done in the name of religion. This is the furthest thing from religion. It's perverse, it's inhuman, and it perverts the true message of Islam and all world religions that within their doctrines also preach peace. True religions don't preach murder, they don't encourage or condemn murder like this. I just want to read you an email that I received actually only a few hours ago. Since the fall of Kabul, many people here I've already spoken to and helped. My office and myself have done my very best to help literally thousands of people worried about family and friends. And every morning when I look at my emails, there are some more emails every morning from people in Afghanistan waiting for visas that have a connection with Australia. We can't help them all. But I read this email only a couple of hours ago, and I just want to read these words because they sum it up. We are Hazara and Shiite people of Afghanistan, and we're in a very bad situation. I lost my father a few months ago, and I'm worried about the rest of the family. I used to work with the police, and I've been threatened by the Taliban since the fall of Kabul, and now we just try and hide. They've killed and will kill our people for years. The Taliban have also issued an official written statement that widows and young girls should be forced to marry the Taliban and young boys should go to war with the Taliban. I was worried about my 3 young sisters and my widowed mother, and I'm worried about myself and my brother. My fiancée is in Australia, here in Dandenong, and I've been sponsored for a partner visa. We also applied for humanitarian visas for our family, but there is no response from the Australian government. Please help us process our visas and save our lives. The Taliban will kill us. Last week, more than 100 Hazara and Shiite students killed and injured in western Kabul near our house. To whom should we take refuge? Who should we ask for help? How do we breathe? How do we survive? They kill us every day just for being Hazaras and Shiites. We don't know the true number of victims from these latest atrocities, or indeed over the last 2 years, because the Taliban will not allow any honest reporting. So we only know what we hear from family and friends. But I just want to make 3 final points. I had not intended Shabnam to talk or even mention the election. This is not, in my view, a political occasion. So I'll just respond to the points in that sense that you made. With regard to the genocide warning, I would note that your words, they're right. These killings now are systemic and they're targeted. They were not part of the conflict that the Taliban sought and perpetrated to take control of the country. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum has now published a statement warning of the serious risk of genocide and crimes against humanity against the Hazaras. And I do believe that the next government of Australia, whether that's my side of politics with the great privilege of forming government, or the current government, that's a matter for the people to decide in a few weeks. But that the next government of Australia needs to restore some of our moral standing in the world and speak up louder and more firmly and work with other nations on these issues and call out these acts. I also acknowledge that the impact on so many people here in our community is made worse because of the delays in visa processing that this email I got just this afternoon refers to. The truth is, this has been a deliberate act of discrimination. For partner visas, which you referred to, Shabnam, it takes on average, about 48 months for someone from Afghanistan to get a visa for their husband or wife. If your husband or wife or loved one is from America or Germany, it takes 5 to 7 months. That is discrimination by the current government. I feel so strongly about that, and I know many people here are waiting to see their wives and their husbands and have missed their own children growing up. That is not acceptable in this country. I also know that near zero of the thousands of visas that have been promised by the government for humanitarian visas have been processed, and indeed they have not even typed half of the applications into the computer in 6 months. We need more resources, whoever the next government is, to actually treat people decently and do the job of the government. Not everyone is going to get a humanitarian visa. We know that. Everyone here knows that. But we need to do the right thing and at least respond to people's cries for help. The final thing, to acknowledge your questions, the federal Labor government will grant permanent refugees permanent protection. There's no place in our country for TPVs or chefs. If you're a genuine refugee, you should have permanent protection and be able to build your life in this country. We need to clear the backlog of asylum seekers and again let genuine refugees stay in this country. We need to end the discrimination and treat people fairly. That doesn't mean everyone will receive Australia's protection, but we can do a lot better than we have been doing in recent years. So I thank you, I stand with you, I'm proud to represent this community, and I congratulate the organisers. We need to speak up more loudly, both across the country and across the world. We've heard much of the mass killings, the crimes against humanity in Ukraine that appear to be perpetrated by Russia, and we need to hear more about what's going on in Afghanistan to the Hazara people. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I would like to now ask Mr. Matthew Cohen, the Greens candidate for Grace, to come up and speak a few words of solidarity.
I welcome you here all tonight, standing with you, and thank you for coming at this very sorrowful time. I wish I was joining you at a happier time. As mentioned, my name is Matthew Cohen. I'm the Greens candidate for Bruce at this federal election. When first running as a Greens candidate 12 years ago for the state seat of Dandenong, I learned so much about the Hazara people. Their struggles here in Australia, their struggles getting to Australia, and most importantly, the horror of what they were fleeing from. The reason I've stayed in the Greens and been a local councillor and been a state election candidate and now a federal election candidate is been because of the Greens' uncompromising support for people seeking asylum, for a fair system for assessing people seeking asylum claims, for supporting a very large intake into Australia, for making sure that those who are waiting for asylum, complete support for very quick processing and for proper humanitarian support. Not wanting to see what has happened for over the last decade, people seeking asylum, living in poverty in Australia, taking years for their claims to be assessed. But to go back to this attack last week, I know full well from talking to so many Hazara community members over the last 12 years that this murderous attack has not happened in isolation. It's another chapter in the continued genocide of the Hazara people over the last century and a half. These attacks are systemic, targeted and continual. It was 12 years ago that a young Hazara woman invited me to an art gallery in central Melbourne. It was an art exhibition of young Hazara artists from Afghanistan and Pakistan. And what struck me was that these were not paintings of hope and optimism. They were paintings that showed the violence, the trauma, the chaotic environment experienced by the youth of Hazara for Afghanistan, in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and then the trauma experienced here as they waited for their claims to be assessed. I bought one of those paintings. It's on the wall of one of my rooms. I see it every day. I see it when I'm playing with my children. I see their happiness in being the fortune of actually living in such a great country. And I see that painting and that reminds me of the hardship that you've experienced. As Greens Senator Janet Rice said of similar attacks last year, those who carry out these crimes must be held accountable. But we also want, and to echo what Shabnam said, we want the Australian government to increase the humanitarian intake quota in our refugee program so that there is more available places for Hazara refugees fleeing this violence. Or as Greens Senator Nick McKim has said, there is a moral imperative for the Australian government to help the Hazara people in their hour of need. As a representative of the Greens, and I acknowledge here tonight Greens Councillor Rhonda Garrard, I commit you to the continued support of the Greens for the Hazara people. Support that has come from our elected senators of the Australian Parliament over the last decades. Support that will continue to come. Support for Australia to be a better global citizen, for to continue to speak up, for the Greens have been relentless in that, against such attacks and attempts against unfairness for the treatment of the Hazara community here. But that painting, and I want to go back to that painting that reminds me of your struggle, that has reminded me also of something positive of what I've seen over the last 12 years. First as an election candidate, then as a Greens councillor for the City of Greater Dandenong for 8 years, and what I still see now. The strength, the resilience, the courage of the Hazara people. I see that tonight with all of you standing here in solidarity, and I stand with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew, and thanks again for continuing your work and your advocacy since your time as a councillor and moving forward. Whilst this may not be an election campaigning platform, obviously this remains a highly political issue for us as a community, and that is why we have reached out to all federal candidates who seek to represent our community in the Australian Parliament, and do want to acknowledge that the Liberal candidate for Bruce, James Moody, wasn't able to make it here tonight in person, but does send his words of solidarity. I think we have an audio of him to play in a moment.
I am James Moody, the Liberal candidate for Bruce. And I'm delivering this message tonight in real sorrow. I'm delivering this message because this last week we saw one of the most cowardly and dastardly attacks we can see. We saw an attack that was racially motivated, that was ethnically motivated. We saw an attack, a terrorist attack on a school that claimed the lives of the most innocent among us, our children. This attack was premeditated, it was targeted, it was a terrorist attack. And I'll be honest, to see the photos, to see the loss of life, to hear the stories, it makes my heart hurt. My heart is really aching over this. And I wish I could be there tonight to spend this time with you. Because this is what we need right now, we need some humanity. We need some humanity. And all I can say to your community is, I know you're hurting, I know this is difficult, and please know it's equally difficult for me. Please stay together tonight. Please remember the fallen, and may God bless you all. Thank you.
We might wonder that there are many types of crimes that happen on a daily basis in a war-torn country like Afghanistan. But then there's genocide, a crime, unlike any of the others. So what is genocide and how can we stop it? As defined under international law, genocide is the deliberate, systemic destruction in whole or part of a national, ethnical, racial or religious group. Genocide is an internationally recognised crime that falls into 5 categories. 1. Killing members of the group. 2. Causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. 3. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life, calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. 4. Imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. 5. Forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. There are a number of other serious, violent crimes that do not fall under the specific definition of genocide. They include crimes against humanity, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and mass killing. So, again, these do not fall under the specific definition of genocide. Genocidal Hazaras have a long history, starting with Amir Abdul Rahman Khan, who conducted a mass genocide of Hazaras in the 1890s. More than 60% of the Hazara population were massacred or displaced during that time. The Hazara land was distributed amongst Pashtun villages. Hazara women and old men were sold as slaves, and many young Hazara girls were kept as concubines by Afghan kings. The recent attack on the schoolgirls, previous attacks on mosques, maternity hospitals, sports clubs, tutorial institutions, and massacres of coal miners and passengers. And very, very recently, the attack on the mine clearance workers. These are all only a few examples of the ongoing genocide of Hazara people that should be stopped. So how can we stop genocide? No one alone can stop genocide, but together, this can be stopped. Genocide is one of the greatest of all crimes. It is extremely dangerous and can have severe consequences. To stop this systemic genocide, we should come together as a nation, raise awareness about the ongoing genocide, and put pressure for international action. So join us in the hashtag Stop Hazara Genocide campaign today and do your share in protecting the Hazara community.
I would like to ask my apologies, Miss Bridget, Sister Bridget from Bridgerton Asylum Seeker Project to come and speak a few words of solidarity tonight.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for asking me just to say a few words. I don't come to formally represent any particular group this evening, but I know I can speak for all people of the faiths that are present in our community. All major faiths believe that every human being is precious, that all human beings are equally precious, and we must create a mass movement that is much stronger than we've seen to date to stop the violence that's happening around our world. I believe we can do this. Mass movements have brought about all sorts of changes, and they always start somewhere and they ripple out. But they need lots and lots of us to be totally committed. And so my prayer tonight for all the Hazara people is that we don't only say that we're standing in solidarity with you, we are, but that we make conscious efforts, conscious and sustained efforts to bring peace to this world which has got so much violence in it at the moment. I have many, many friends who are Hazaras. I know how much they're hurting. I grieve with them and with you, and I pray that this absolute horror will end soon. Thank you.
در یک قسمت برنامه از آقای حیات رحیمی که عضو کمیته برنامه‌ریزی این برنامه امشب هستند و همچنین مدافع حقوق مهاجرین در استرالیا دعوت میکنیم که روی استیج بیان و چند کلمه صحبت کنیم. تشکر.
Hi everyone, on behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to welcome you all and acknowledge the presence of our mayor and also councillors and candidates for the major parties for the federal election. I've been asked to talk about the aim of the program tonight. As you know, the aim of our tonight's Candlelight Vigil is to commemorate the victims of the recent terrorist attacks upon Hazara Shias in Afghanistan. Our aim is to raise awareness about the injustice and severity of Hazara Shia genocide in Afghanistan. We hope that the media, politicians and international community hear our voice. We also hope and ask the Australian government and international community not to recognize the Taliban terrorist group because they are unable and cannot bring peace and justice in Afghanistan. We also ask the Australian government and the international community to protect the Hazara people. We also ask the Australian government and international community to recognize the Hazara genocide. We ask the Australian government to grant permanent residency to temporary visa holders, process and expedite the partner visa applications, citizenship applications, and to increase the humanitarian visa for members of our community because Afghanistan is not safe. Long delay in family reunification, citizenship delay, restrictions on temporary visa holders have had a huge negative impact on people's mental health. Members of our community are hard-working. Many of them have set up their own businesses across Australia. But unfortunately, the government of Afghanistan, the previous government, and now under the rule of the Taliban, they've been discriminated against. We've been peaceful. We contribute to the social, economic, and culture of Australian society. We are and have been the same in Afghanistan. We acknowledge that other members of the Afghan citizens have been killed and have been targeted in different cities in Afghanistan. However, attacks on schools, mosques, hospitals, and individuals have been constant on our people. They are targeted and systematic. Therefore, we ask the Australian government and the international community not to recognize the Taliban because they are not able to bring justice and peace in Afghanistan. Thank you.
در این قسمت برنامه از خانم آرزو دعوت میکنیم که یک دکلمه دارن بیاین برای ما بخوانش بیرون.
Good evening, dear everyone. I'm Arzu Rahimi, and today we're standing here once again in the mourning over the loss of our educated, young, and innocent children of Afghanistan's most persecuted ethnic group, the Hazaras, who have a long history of victimization. Hazaras who have been brutally killed by the most ruthless creatures and the enemies of humanity because of their religious and ethnic identity. On this occasion, I have chosen a poem by Afshin Allah, which has been written about the victims of the Shtibachi attack in Kabul. فدای آن لبان روزگارت، فدای نرگس مست خمارت. گل من تشنه بودی آخرین بار، بیا بابا که آمد وقت افطار. کجا
به قسمت برنامه از خانم رحیمه رضایی که رئیس انجمن استرالیان هزار ویمن فرندشیپ نتورک هستند و همچنین اعضای هزاره ویکتوریا دعوت میکنیم که بیان و میخواین در مورد تاثیر حملات اخیر و روی مردم ما در استرالیا و هزاره های ویکتوریا صحبت کنیم.
Good evening everyone. به نام خداوند آگاهی، آزادی و برابری. خواهران، برادران، عزیزان و هموطنان، درود و سلام مرا پذیرا باشید. خوشحالم که در بین شما هستم و فرصت این را دارم که نکاتی را در مورد حملات اخیر و نسل‌کشی دوامدار و تاریخی که بر علیه مردم ما در طول ادامه دارد را خدمتتان عرض کنم. در طول نزدیک به 2 قرن گذشته مردم هزاره در افغانستان همواره قربانی نسل‌کشی و پاکسازی قومی سیستماتیک و تبعیض گسترده قرار داشتند. اولین و بزرگترین نسل‌کشی که مردم هزاره متحمل شده‌اند در دهه 90 قرن 19 میلادی رخ داد که نزدیک به 62% از این مردم توسط حکومت استبدادی عبدالرحمن خان قتل عام شدند و صدها هزار نفر به اسارت و بردگی گرفته شدند و یا مجبور شدند که از وطن بگریزند. در اواخر دهه 90 قرن 20 در اولین دوران سیاه سلطه طالبان ده‌ها هزار هزاره توسط این گروه به صورت دست جمعی و فقط به جرم هزاره بودن به قتل رسیدند. متاسفانه این روند و نسل کشی مردم هزاره در دوران جمهوریت هم ادامه یافت و به خصوص از سال 2014 میلادی به این سو مردم هزاره به جرم باور به ارزش‌های دموکراتیک و تلاش برای آموختن علم و دانش، حمایت از حقوق برابر زن و مرد همواره مورد حملات هدفمند و دوامدار گروه تروریستی طالبان و داعش قرار داشتند. همه این حملات در مکان‌هایی رخ دادند که هیچ نهاد نظامی یا امنیتی در آنجا استقرار نداشتند و برخلاف تمام عرف و قوانین کنوانسیون ژنوا و قوانین رایج مبنی بر تفکیک نظامی از غیر نظامی ها در محلات جنگی مردم غیر نظامی هزاره، در مکاتب، مکانهای آموزشی، مساجد، دکانها، باشگاه‌های ورزشی و در حین برگزاری مراسم‌های مذهبی و فرهنگی هم مورد حملات انتحاری و بمبگذاری‌های پی در پی قرار گرفتند. در تازه ترین موارد این نسل کشی هفته گذشته بیش از 130 دانش آموز در لیسه عبدالرحیم شهید در غرب شهر کابل در اثر چندین انفجار کشته شدند. 2 روز بعد از این حادثه ده‌ها تن از قوم هزاره در یک مسجد در شهر مزار شریف در حین عبادت و برگزاری مراسم مذهبی قتل عام شدند. ما از دولت استرالیا و سایر ارگان‌های بین المللی به شمول شورای امنیت سازمان ملل متحد و سازمان عفو بین الملل می‌خواهیم که از مکانیزم‌های بین المللی موجود استفاده کرده و این نسل کشی و پاکسازی قومی آشکار و مستند را تحت یک قطعنامه فوری شورای امنیت ملل متحد به رسمیت شناخته و طالبان را رسما موظف به رعایت حقوق بشر نمایند و تأمین امنیت کامل قربانیان آن، یعنی مردم هزاره، از ارائه و استفاده فرستادن کمک‌های بین المللی به این گروه کاملا خودداری کنند. در 20 سال گذشته مردم هزاره به دلیل تعلقات اتنیکی و مذهبی و ترویج ارزش‌های دموکراتیک مانند رسمیت شناختن حق زنان، آموزش و تحصیل و کار و پیشرفت در امورات آموزشی، تلاش برای کسب حقوق برابر و شکستاندن تبعیض مورد نفرت گروه‌های هراس‌افکن مثل طالبان و داعش بوده و همواره مورد حملات دهشت‌افکنانه قرار داشتند. جامعه جهانی به خوبی از این واقعیت‌ها باخبر هستند و این وظیفه انسانی و وجدانی را دارند که از تمام ابزارهای موجود برای حمایت از اقلیت هزاره که در شرف یک نسل کشی دیگر قرار گرفتند استفاده نموده و مانع تکرار چنین فاجعه بشری شوند. پیشنهاد ما این هست که ارائه هر گونه کمک مالی و بشردوستانه دوامدار به افغانستان باید مشروط بر توقف نسل کشی و قتل عام مردم هزاره و تأمین امنیت آنها مانند سایر شهروندان افغانستان باشد. نباید این گروه به عنوان دولت قانونی و مشروع افغانستان شناخته شوند و هر گونه تلاش برای عادی سازی روابط با یک چنین گروه متحجر و افراطی به معنای پشت پا زدن به تمامی ارزش‌های دموکراتیک است. پرواضح است که پناهندگان و پناهجویان هزاره تبار به هیچ وجه نمی‌توانند به کشور خود بازگردند، چرا که در صورت بازگشت با خطر نسل کشی و کشته شدن قطعی روبرو هستند. ولذا شرایط جدید ایجاب می‌کند که دولت استرالیا با درک تهدیدات جدی امنیتی علیه مردم هزاره در افغانستان و شدت آسیب پذیری این گروه قومی زمینه اعطای ویزه دائم را برای این دسته از افراد فراهم نماید که آنها بتوانند در جامعه استرالیا به خوبی ادغام گردیده و بدون محدودیت در بازار کار و اقتصاد آن سهم فعال و فعالیت مفید داشته باشند. بسیاری از درخواست کنندگان اعضای فامیل نزدیکشان در استرالیا زندگی می کنند و این خودش یک نقطه مثبت و دلیل دیگری برای تسریع روند اسکان و ادغامشان در جامعه و دسترسی به نهادهای آموزشی و بازار کار و شغل می باشد. بسیاری از اعضای جامعه هزاره سالهاست که بدون هیچ دلیل منطقی و قانونی از زن، شوهر و فرزندانشان جدا مانده‌اند و تحولات اخیر هم باعث ایجاد استرس شدید و نگرانی دائمی آنها از امنیت و سلامتی اعضای خانوادهشان شده است. اعضای کمیونیتی هزاره در سرتاسر استرالیا همواره پرچمدار و حمایت کننده ارزش‌های دموکراتیک کشورمان استرالیا بوده و همیشه نقش فعال و پویایی را در شکوفایی و رشد اقتصادی و شغل آفرینی را ایفا کرده است و می‌کند. روی همین لحاظ از دولت استرالیا می‌خواهیم که به بررسی پرونده‌های درخواست ویزاهای بشردوستانه و فامیلی و تابعیت اعضای کمیونیتی هزاره اولویت بیشتر شده. تشکر از وقتتون.
و در یک قسمت برنامه زهرا خانم تشریف دارد.
Good evening everyone. My name is Zahra Nasiri. Before starting, firstly I would like to acknowledge and pay my huge respect to those respectful families who have lost their member of families in the recent terrorist attack in Afghanistan. Those honored victims have been nurtured in the way of learning and improving. Today they have buried and were killed with thousands of inspiration, hopes that they had for themselves and for their countries and for the community. And from the deep part of my heart, I can feel their pain, how they would feel. Back then when I was in Afghanistan, this frustrating moment has happened near to my school as well. And from that day on, my family and I decided to not go to school anymore. Beside of those problems and beside of those things and discrimination, I still had the confidence and had the inspiration to study at home. And then I started to study at home for 2 years. But hopefully after 2 years, I succeed to come to Australia and now I'm able to continue my education. Tonight, I'm standing here to say, let's not be sad because they were killed due to education and learning. They were not killed because of a fight, discrimination or many other things. So I want from the Australian government, please do not recognize the Taliban regime because they are the enemy of students who are learning and improving. Thank you so much.
در این قسمت برنامه از آقای جنرال مراد دعوت میکنیم که برای چند دقیقه بیان بر ما صحبت کنیم. تشکر.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. انا لله و انا الیه راجعون. حضار گرامی، خانم ها، آقایان و نخبه های خوب مردم ما، هم از کشور دوست و برادر استرالیا و همچنان خواهر و برادرایی که امشب من حیث یک شام غریبا شما در اینجا جمع شدیم، یادبودی از قربانیان نسل کشی که در مکتب عبدالرحیم شهید حادثه المناف رخ داده در اینجا شما جمع شدیم، با مردم خود، با جامعه خود، با انسان‌های آزاده غم شریکی کردیم. از یکایک شما اظهار سپاس و قدردانی و شکران میکنم. دعا میکنیم برای شهدایی که در غرب کابل و همچنان در مسجد جامع مزار شریف، کندوز و سایر نقاط که در این روزا یه حادثه المناک رخ دادن، برای شهدا ما دعا میکنیم که خداوند اونا را غریق رحمتشان بکنه. دوستای عزیز، حادثه بسیار سنگین است. ما یک بار دیگر از دوستان استرالیایی خود، اینا هم در غم و شادی مردم افغانستان شریک بودند. به 10 نفر قربانی دادن در دفاع از مردم افغانستان. و امشب ما میفهمم که شما در اینجا جمع شدین، یک پیغام، یک مسیجی برای فامیلا و خانواده از قربانیای سربازان استرالیا که در افغانستان اونا جانشان از دست دادن، و این یک پیغام است که شما و اونها همه در غم مردم افغانستان شریک هستین. بنابراین جا داره که از حکومت استرالیا هم سپاسگزاری بکنم که همیشه از هر لحاظ با شما یک جای من حیث یک ملت بسیار سرفراز در غم و شادی شما شریک هستند. از اینا هم سپاسگزاری میکنم. ما من حیث یک سپاهی مردم، من حیث یک جنرالی که بسیار کم وقت میشه بعد از حادثه المناک از افغانستان برآمدیم، شاهد بر نسل کشی مردم هزاره. ما ایرا یک بار دیگر پیام میتون برای تمام دنیا که در افغانستان شریک بودن و تعهد داشتن با مردم افغانستان که این حادثه المناکه که در این عصر زمان یک بار دیگر تمام امتیازات هم بر زنا قائل شدن، اونها این حادثه را انجام دادن و از تمام بانهای تروریستی که مرتکب این جرم هستند برشان هشدار میتیم که این مردم در این حادثه اینا نابود نخواهد شدن و اینا بر نسل‌های آیندهشون پیغام دارن که ما همیشه در مقابل بی‌عدالتی، ظلم، ستم و ناروایی مقاومت خواهیم کرد. پس به اون لحاظ ما پیام خدا امشب برای تمام بانهای تروریستی که دست جنایت نمیکشند اونا را هشدار برشان میتیم که اونا یک بار دیگر فکر بکنن که در افغانستان چی میگذرد و این حادثه اینطور نیست که یک حادثه تصادفی باشد، یک حادثه کاملا پلان شده و طرح‌ریزی شده و سیستماتیک است که در اینجا رخ داده. پس به او خاطر ما ایرا تحمل این حادثه را هیچ وقت کرده نخواهیم بجز از که ایرا پیغام میتیم و ایرا تاکید هم میکنیم که اگر از این حوادث جلوگیری نشود، اونهایی که مسئول هستند مسئولیتشان باید بپذیرند که در اینجا در این حادثه تروریستی و حادثه المناکی که مردم افغانستان به خاک و خون شانده اونا شریک جرم هستند. پس به ولی از اینکه برنامه بسیار اخیر شده و ختم است و نمیخوایم زیاد صحبت بکنم، یک بار دیگر با تمام خانواده قربانیان عزیز ما که در این حادثه اونا دامنگیرشان شده، ما در غمشان شریک هستیم و دعای خیر برای تمام خانواده شهدا میکنیم. السلام علیکم و رحمت الله و برکاته.
We do also have another member of Parliament who has requested to speak a few words of solidarity before we officially wrap up the proceedings of tonight. I would like to ask Dr. Tien Pugh to come up on the stage and speak a few words.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. I come here with a very heavy heart and indeed a bleeding heart to join the Candlelight Vigil tonight to remember and to pay respect to those victims who have been killed. The young children at their high school, the worshippers at the sacred place of worship, been murdered and also their life been taken away by some of the very despicable acts. Not only that, the Taliban not only protect the people, but they also try to suppress the information from leaking out to see, for the world to know who is behind those acts and who is in control of, and also try to propagate the terror in the country. They also try to, in that way, this is an act of condoning those terror and murderous acts. Those things happen in Afghanistan at the moment, particularly for the Harazas. People over there deeply impacted the people in this part of the world, in the southeastern metropolitan in particular. And I come here, I understand, I was once a refugee from Vietnam, so I have seen some of the horror of war and have been in a refugee camp. And those people here in Australia, for themselves, for their safety, they are very much worrying about their relatives and also what's happening to their people at the other side of the world. So I come here on behalf of myself and also on behalf of the Victorian Labour government, to show the support, to share the sorrow, and to express our solidarity with the community. I do believe in humanity, but humanity needs to be fought for, and those things we will have to fight for, and also to bring the people who are behind those to justice, and to restore the peace and also restore humanity. With those few words, I'd like to show our support and all the best, and God bless. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tian. I would like to now invite Mr. Zabir Mazuri, one of the organising committee members, here on the stage for some concluding remarks. And can I also add one of the most hardworking members of the community here in the southeast, and also one of the tireless advocates.
Thank you, Shabnam. I would like to welcome everyone to the event tonight, and I would like to also welcome all the guests. I know this was a very short notice. We acted on Friday afternoon to hold this event because of all the events that was happening in Afghanistan, and we got in contact with the council, and they were very helpful to get the facility to us. And thank you all for attending this event tonight. I know it is hard time for our community. We are mourning, we have lost relatives, we have lost members of our community, and we have grave concerns for members of our families who are still back in Afghanistan. I know this is only to come together and consolidate and mourn and come together, but our advocacy and our work will not end here tonight. We want to do much more as a community in order to be the voice of the people in Afghanistan, the voice of the Hazara and the Shia community who are systematically targeted for their race and religion. We, as Shabnam John read the statement clearly have some demands, and we will work with you as community members to be a united voice, to demand action and do whatever we can from our individually as well as a community. I know a large number of you individually have been helping community members back in Afghanistan financially, and also with other support. There is a donation campaign going on for the victims of the school attack, and also the mosque attack in Mazar Sharif, and other attacks that recently have happened. I would also like to say a couple of words in Dari for our community members. ما این برنامه را فقط روز پنجشنبه روز جمعه اقدام کردیم که برگزاری کنیم در یک وقت بسیار کوتاه و کوشش کردیم با همکاری همه دوستا این برنامه برگزار شد و از شما تشکر میکنم که اینجا شرکت کردیم. مگر کار ما و دادخواهی ما در اینجا ختم نمیشه. یک بخشی از برنامه ماست که امشب به خاطری که با دور هم جمع شویم و یک یادبودی از قربانیان انجام شود. مگر از این بعد ما کوشش خواندیم این بیانیه با دولت استرالیا، با نهادهای بین المللی، با نهادهایی که مسئولیت دارند در این عرصه باید کار کنند. با اونا در تماس میشیم تا یک کار شود. جامعه ما از این نسل‌کشی و از این تمام حملات هدفمند که علیه هزارها و شیعه در افغانستان جدیت دارند نجات پیدا کنند.
در این قسمت برنامه شبنم جان یک استیتمنت هست که میخواین بخوانن و من خلاصش هم باز فارسی برای شما بیان میکنم. این استیتمنت در مدیام ریلیز شده امروز و شبنم خانم
I do also want to bring your attention to a signatory list happening on my left, your right. It's the statement, this current statement right now that I will read out to you, and if you are in support of it, please do write your individual name, your organization name on the rolling list of names. I think it's a few meters long at this stage. We will aim to publish this in the coming days to show who's and the amount and the extent of support and solidarity for this cause right now. So released this morning, the statement reads Victorian Hazara Community Statement on the recent attacks on Hazara school children in Kabul, Afghanistan. On Tuesday, 19th of April 2022, once more, two educational centres, Abdul Rahim Shahid High School and Mumtaz Educational Centre in Kabul, Afghanistan, came under coordinated terrorist attacks. Both centres are in the Hazara ethnic neighbourhood of Dashtabachi, a disadvantaged area in the west of Kabul. In the attacks, over 100 children were killed and injured. No one knows the exact number of victims because the Taliban have banned media from reporting on the attacks. Reports from local people and witnesses suggest a very high number of casualties. In one hospital alone, Jinnah Hospital, over 30 dead and injured had been transferred. Abdul Rahim Shahid High School was the largest high school in the country, or is the largest high school in the country, and some would say even in the world, as it houses 30,000 students and over 400 teachers in 3 daily shifts. It was also one of the most successful high schools in Afghanistan because its graduates pass the university entry examination with success rates. This atrocity has had an immense impact upon the Hazara community in Australia, including the prominent Hazara community in the southeast of Melbourne, in the cities of Greater Dandenong, the city of Casey, Cardinia Shire, local government areas, the Hume City Council and various other areas of Victoria. Many Hazara and Victorian communities are deeply impacted by these attacks who have lost family members or close relatives, or who have family members residing in these areas of Kabul that come under continuous attack and targeted attacks over the past years. Through this vigil tonight, we do hope to raise awareness of the injustices and the severity of these injustices that continue to happen and amount to genocide of the Hazara people in Afghanistan. And we do demand the Australian and the international community to take accountability for these outrageous human rights violations and do more to take meaningful action for Afghanistan and its people, especially after 20 years of intervention in Afghanistan. Some of our key asks of the Australian government and those who stand in solidarity with us here tonight is to recognise the systematic and targeted killings of Hazaras and Shias in Afghanistan as crimes against humanity, which may also amount to genocide. Support the measures aimed at physical protection of Hazaras and Shias in Afghanistan. Not recognise the Taliban as the government of Afghanistan. List the Taliban as a terrorist organisation in the Commonwealth Criminal Code. Grant permanent protection to over 5,000 refugees from Hazara community suffering on temporary protection visas in Australia. Expedite the humanitarian, family reunion and citizenship applications of thousands here in Australia. Lift the ban on resettlement of Hazaras and refugees from Afghanistan stuck in limbo in Indonesia. The statement is not printed on the piece of paper or fabric over there, but you've got the statement now. Please do show your support by signing the statement in that corner of the square. And I'll hand over to Mubaraka to do a quick summary first.
تشکر شبنم جان. خب خلاصه از این استیتمنت میگم که اتفاقات اخیر که در کابل اتفاق افتاده به انگلیسی نوشتن و همچنین تاثیراتی که این اتفاق برای مردم هزارهای ما در استرالیا و افغانستان داشتن نوشته شده و همچنین درخواست‌های مردم استرالیا از دولت استرالیا به صورت 7 نکته نوشته شده و به صورت یک تومار چاپ شده در سمت چپ اسکوئر هست. اگر خواستین و من نکته ها رو برای شما در فارسی میخوانم، اگر موافق بودین میتونین که امضا کنین و این امضاها جمع میشه و به دولت فرستاده میشه و هر چقدر که امضا بیشتر باشه مسلما صدای ما بیشتر شنیده خواهد شد. خود درخواست های مردم از دولت استرالیا به شکل زیر می باشد: 1. به رسمیت شناختن کشتار سیستماتیک و هدفمند هزارها و شیعیان در افغانستان به عنوان جنایت علیه بشریت که ممکن است به نسل کشی نیز تبدیل شود. 2. اقدامات حمایتی با هدف حفاظت فیزیکی هزارها و شیعیان در افغانستان. 3. عدم به رسمیت شناختن طالبان به عنوان حکومت افغانستان. 4. طالبان به عنوان یک سازمان تروریستی تحت قانون جنایی کامنولث استرالیا ضبط شود. 5. اعطای حمایت دائم به دارندگان ویزای موقت در استرالیا. 6. تصریح در درخواست‌های بشردوستانه به هم پیوستن خانواده‌ها و اعطای شهروندی استرالیا. 7. لغو ممنوعیت اسکان مجدد پناهندگان هزاره در اندونزیا که به مدت خیلی طولانی است، سرنوشتشان نامعلوم است.